Shalom, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. It's been really too long since we've been in the holy city of Lubbock. It's the same, there's apps that should show you that it's the same parallel as Jerusalem. Jerusalem is getting 2 feet of snow right now as we speak. So I'm so happy to be here. At my age, I'm done with the snow, I hope. So, first of all, you know that tonight is the new moon of Adar, Rosh Chodesh Adar. So it's a very, very holy time. And we'll be here for a few days. We're very excited about sharing some different ideas of Torah. And of course, I'd like to begin traditionally the first night with an update about the work of the Temple Institute. And more than that, the question that everyone has is where are we at regarding the whole concept of the building of the temple? And there's an unprecedented amount of progress that's going on. I know that many of you follow and also support, which is so deeply appreciated, the work that's been going on, but the desire for the building of the temple and the preparation that's been going on is unprecedented, and it's really a feeling that we're in a new era. First of all, the whole level of public awareness, the whole level of public participation, and the healthy debate also in Israeli society about the temple is really amazingly new. And of course, the activities recently that involve so much of the public, the practice of the Passover offering and the water libation on Sukkot, and the things that we've reported on the wonderful Temple Institute Facebook page, which just surpassed 100,000 likes, or as we call it in Hebrew, like. So if you haven't done like, they say these things are very important. Anyway, so we do a lot of reporting there about the wonderful things that have been going on, the preparation of the olive oil for the menorah, all these things that show a new level that hasn't been seen in 2,000 years. And of course, thanks to the support of many of you, the whole concept of the building plans that we've begun to work on, that we're going to be revealing very soon. And at the same time, the Temple Mount is in the news more than ever before. And it's also unprecedented. It's become entrenched in the current political campaign that's coming up in Israel for a new government. There are parties that make a very bold statement about the Temple Mount. Yes, no. So it's become so much part of consciousness. And at the same time, I don't know if you're aware that there's been a 92% increase in the amount of Jewish people that have been going up to the Temple Mount. But of course, at the same time, the situation on the Temple Mount is very, very difficult. And at the same time, the level of terror throughout the world is also unprecedented, even though it's been said that the climate change is a greater challenge to the average citizen. I believe that was updated, that the problem is we have to create jobs and find a way to facilitate the aspirations of these folks. But in the meantime, it's all random anyway. You have ISIS, beheadings, burning people alive, slavery, sexual slavery of children, wholesale slaughter of Yazidis, Christians, the Iranian threat, which is not really an Israeli neurosis, but a global threat, even though Tehran is now America's greatest ally, and it goes on and on and on. The whole crisis with Israel now over Netanyahu's, invitation to give a speech explaining exactly what we're up against with Iran. The point is, there seems to be a tremendous amount of spiritual conflict and warfare, which has a very strong manifestation in the world right now. And since I believe, and I think that many of you also believe, that how it goes for Israel goes for the world. And especially the Temple Mount is really like a barometer of what's going on in the whole world. So what I would like to try to do is see if it's possible to make sense of this and connect some of these dots. The day that we arrived in the wonderful state of Texas in the city of Abilene. That day we received word that this little girl, Adele Biton, passed away. Many of you I know were praying for her and aware of her name through Israel National News and the email lists that go around. So everybody knows this little girl who was 4 years old, who had been fighting for her life since March 2013, when the car that she was traveling in was struck by a fist-sized rock, struck her in the side of the head. And it was a very, very long and agonizing period when there were many ups and downs, but unfortunately she passed away. And that evening in Abilene, I said, we were really reeling from that news. We had been so involved with the prayer. I said I wanted to dedicate my words for her, so I think that we can still do that. And again, tonight is the first day of the month of Adar, because when you have a 2-day Rosh Chodesh, the second day is Aleph. And Rosh Chodesh is a very holy time, the new moon, because it contains a concentration of the essence of the month. And of course, every month has a different potential, a different dynamic, and a different lesson, a different opportunity for personal growth. And everybody knows, what is this month of Adar all about? The apex, the climax of the month is Purim. So Purim is the reflection of what the whole month is really all about, the joy of Purim. You know what a Jewish holiday is, right? Sam and I were talking. You know about the template of a Jewish holiday? Everybody knows, right? They tried to kill us. The plot failed. Let's eat. But actually, Purim is much more complicated than that. And the truth is that there's a connection between Purim and Adar and the Holy Temple and the building of the Temple and the Temple Mount. And again, that question of where are we regarding all of this and what is the truth of what's been happening lately? So, Adar's message is this tremendous joy of Purim, and this is something that I've had the opportunity to share with you in many different forums over the years, that there's an idea about this month that's so much deeper, which is, in a word, if you wanted to capsulize not only the month, but the whole experience of Purim and the whole concept of the Scroll of Esther, it's that appearances are deceiving. Because the world, everybody knows, is based on appearances. And Adar teaches us that nothing is as it appears. Because first of all, as everybody knows, the Scroll of Esther is the only book in the whole Torah, Tanakh, in which the name of God does not appear. Because his presence was hidden. And I've always liked to share the idea that the word Adar, Aleph, Daled, Resh, is related to Aderet, which is a cloak, a garment. Because the only way that you can see something is from an external appearance. And then you think that you know what you're looking at. And I always like to quote the early science fiction master H.G. Wells, who actually, I must say, because I must just, we have that obsession, he actually was very anti-Semitic, but in the end of his life, he apologized. Yeah, he actually maintained a correspondence with Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel. So, just thought I'd mention that. Before you quote anybody, you have to see, well, what exactly did he think about the Jews? You don't have to, but if you're really... Anyway, H.G. Wells, the father, together with Jules Verne, in modern science fiction, wrote the book The Invisible Man, about this mad scientist who made himself invisible but wore a raincoat and a coat and sunglasses and gloves, and that's how he went out into the public, and people saw him, but they weren't seeing him, they were seeing the coat, the aderet. And that's exactly what the lesson of Adar is, that what we see in the world is only the trappings, but God is actually causing everything to happen, and he wears the world like a garment. He wears the world. That's how he manifests himself, through what appears to be just happenstance. So it's a deep, deep time this month in Purim, and it conveys this deep, deep lesson because everything is really covered over, and we don't really know what's going on. Not only in the Megillah, in the Scroll of Esther, where Hashem's name is not even mentioned once because his presence wasn't seen. But if I look at the situation today on the Temple Mount, right? It's the only holy place in the world. It's the only place that God chose to rest His presence. Those that have been there and know with great personal sacrifice what it means to go there and why we go there, to be seen there by God, to show that we believe in that vision of what was and what will be. If you mention the name of the God of Israel there, you could be arrested. The only name that's allowed to be mentioned there is Allah. And you may say, what's in a name? Why quibble, as the Secretary of State says? Why quibble? It's really the same God. Or is it? Or is it? Don't rush me now. Don't attack me. I don't claim to be God's spokesman. Actually, maybe I am. So in 1994, we had a neighbor, Rena and I, in our neighborhood in Jerusalem, Nachshon Wachsman, a 19-year-old IDF soldier, was kidnapped by the Hamas. And he was held for ransom for 6 agonizing days until he was murdered, just as special IDF forces had learned exactly where his location was, which actually wasn't even far from our home. And they were moving in to try to extricate him. He was murdered. But before the end of this whole difficult period, during those days of uncertainty, his mother, Esther, made a plea to the Hamas for her son's life. And this is what she said, referring to Hamas. She said, "They speak about God. I want to know if we have the same God. How do they relate to a person, a living person who is his mother's child? How do they relate as believing people, as parents of children, to human life? This is how I would like them to relate to my son, and they should return him to me whole, alive, healthy, for the sake of the God of all of us." And it struck me at the time, was she, was it wishful thinking? Did she really think that? Is this the same God? Because the world that we live in today, one would think that it's an issue that must be addressed. And it's not a very simple subject or easy subject or a comfortable subject. But one would think that if we do not address the issue, then we are guilty of the same kind of mindless whitewash that seems to be overtaking civilization. So, again, everything from the perspective of Adar, because it's not happenstance, which, by the way, is the whole concept of what Purim is all about, that it looks like happenstance. It's not happenstance that we're here right now. So what else do we know about this month? So on the mystical level, every month has a different, what's called in Kabbalah a controller, a different spiritual rectification. And there's a tradition from the Holy Arizal, those of you who have heard of him, that the spiritual mending or tikkun of this month is laughter. Now, laughter is not joy. Laughter is something else. And there's a difference between joy and laughter. When do we laugh? When something is just beyond all proportion. Maybe when something is too good to be true, unbelievable. When Sarah was informed at her advanced age that she would have a child, which was anyway physically impossible, she laughed, right? Or let's say somebody tells you that the problem with ISIS is that they need jobs, right? That's another good example. Something of being just unbelievable. But the idea of, am I doing okay, Sam? The idea of the laughter of Adar is really when we have this tremendously strong revelation of Hashem's presence in our lives as our Father, how much He loves us. It makes us laugh with this deepest level of joy. And actually, this also relates to the Temple Mount, because if you don't have a sense of humor, you have no business trying to come to the Temple Mount. And the interesting thing here is this incredibly famous, moving, beautiful story that's told by the sages of Israel about the great Rabbi Akiva, that ties in the concept of laughter to the Temple Mount. Rabbi Akiva was this incredible person who was eventually tortured to death, put to death by the Romans publicly for the crime of teaching the Torah in the generation when all of the rabbis who possessed the knowledge of the Torah were systematically killed by the Romans. Rabbi Akiva, The story that's told is that about 60 years after the destruction of the temple, he was walking on the Temple Mount together with his colleagues, some of the greatest rabbis of Israel, and in the rubble and the ruins of the temple, all of a sudden, a fox jumped out from the place that had been the Holy of Holies. So all the rabbis started to cry, and Rabbi Akiva started to laugh. It sounds like I'm starting a joke, right? Like a Seinfeld joke. But this is actually the story. Rabbi Akiva started to laugh. So they said to him, Akiva, are you crazy? I mean, that's not exactly what they said. Why are you laughing? So he said, why are you crying? They said, the verse that states Zion is plowed into a field, foxes prowl there, has been fulfilled. Shall we not cry? So he says, yes, but that shows you, since the verses of punishment have come true, so then also the verses of consolation will also come true. And Zechariah says that the days will yet come that Jerusalem will be so secure and safe that little children will be playing in the streets and old men will be leaning on their staffs because there'll be such a feeling of peace. So that's why I'm laughing. So they say, oh, you have comforted us. That's a very, very amazing story. And it obviously shows something about his very special perspective. Because we're talking about the Temple Mount, this place chosen by God, destined to facilitate, again, the reunion of all humanity. These are very, very serious, far-reaching concepts, the reunion of all humanity. Everyone's going to be streaming there, Isaiah says, and we're all going to be able to be on the level together of understanding the greatest gift, the greatest treasure. The purpose of life is just that we know that there's really a God in the world and that there's a reason for our life is just to connect with Him. So what's going on there now? There we have terrible, blatant anti-Semitism, terrorist-funded, anti-Israeli activity. Jews and other non-Muslims are subjugated to discriminatory, anti-democratic restrictions, which, by the way, we have to remember is not Israel's choice. This is not about criticizing Israel, although I can do that too. This is because Israel is forced to police something called the status quo. The status quo is maintained by the Jordanian Waqf, which is a Jordanian Muslim organization. And therefore, because of this, whatever it is, the status quo, Jews and other non-Muslims are denied these basic civil and human rights. At the same time, they're basically illegally prevented from exercising their right to pray. And these non-Muslim visitors also witness open support of and influence by banned and illegal terrorist groups that openly incite and often lead to violence. And we haven't even mentioned the ongoing revisionist history where priceless, historically significant antiquities are systematically destroyed in the hope of erasing permanently the legacy of the Jewish people and the connection of the people of Israel to this place, and it's our national treasure. But yet again, despite, I keep on going back and forth, because despite these disheartening, disillusioning, very oppressive circumstances, we have this incredibly steadily growing manifestation of renewed spiritual revolution, interest in the Temple Mount, 92% increase since last year of Jews. 10,906 Jewish visitors the past year ascended the Temple Mount according to official police figures. And the reason that is so important is because, and this is what you really have to appreciate, how many of you have been to the Temple Mount? And how many with me, for example? You know that it is a difficult experience, and it definitely requires a level of commitment. And unfortunately, lately, even maybe courage, because it's become extremely difficult. And it's actually, I believe, precisely this Jewish dedication that the forces that are in control on the Temple Mount find so disturbing. It's a simple, pure, expressed desire of the Jewish people to pray on the Temple Mount and to pray for the whole world, to pray for humanity. We're not bad people. I mean, what do we want to pray for after all? Pray for peace. That's considered by Islam to be so confrontational to itself that an attempt was made in November to assassinate one Jew, Yehuda Glick, who works for the rights of all people to be able to pray at the Temple Mount, and another number of prominent Temple Mount activists have been publicly targeted for death in the name of the defense of Al-Aqsa. So the levels of intensity of this incitement on the Temple Mount and around the subject of the Temple Mount, although I, for example, have been involved in this subject for almost 30 years, the levels now are increased tremendously, dramatically. And then I know those of you who have been with us on the Temple Mount, you see these groups of Muslim agitators that are actually paid, salaried by Hamas to follow the Jewish visitors, to shout their imprecations, abuse them, physically provoke them, block their way, photograph them. Yesterday, you might have read in Israel National News that my comrade, Yitzhak Ruven, brought Congressman Dennis Ross from Florida up to the Temple Mounts. He was also supposed to be accompanied by Congressman Robert Pittenger from North Carolina, but he sprained his ankle. Nobody knows that but me. And when we bring these congressmen to the Temple Mounts, it's anonymous. They don't identify themselves as who they are, so that they get what we call the Jewish treatment. And they get to see these abuses and what it's like, because if they're in our company, even though they don't look like us, they have to receive the same treatment. So they see what it's like, and they see that inexplicably, under the eyes of the police, who ostensibly are assigned to accompany the Jewish visitors and secure their visit, the police apparently, acting upon some instruction, which seems to be very mysterious, they do nothing whatsoever to prevent this conflict, to stop the Muslim agitators from inciting. But, as we have discussed and reported many times, they do arrest the Jews for answering or for complaining about it or for asking the police to intervene. And in fact, about 2 weeks ago, there was a Jewish child, about 14, a minor, that was arrested by the police and held overnight, which raised a huge outcry, because all he basically did was ask the police to stop them. And that very day, and he was charged with preventing the police from carrying out their duty. And that very day, there was a very interesting piece in the news, the same day that the child was arrested, and that was incredibly important and connected to the arrest of the 14-year-old, that Jordan returned its ambassador to Israel. Because the day after Yehuda Glick was shot 4 times point blank, Jordan withdrew their ambassador because they were very angry. I guess that he didn't die, but besides that, they were very angry that Israel made a move to close the Temple Mount indefinitely. Caving to international pressure, very, very quickly, within 12 hours, Israel reopened the Temple Mount to Muslims only. It would be some days before Jews would be once again allowed to return to the Temple Mount. But when this happened just about 2 weeks ago, the child was arrested. There were different things going on behind the scenes. We're going to talk about this. Jordan announced that they have ample and sufficient proof now to be able to feel that Israel is taking the issues of the Muslim rights at Al-Aqsa seriously enough. So they return the ambassador. So what are the forces that are at work here? There must be an explanation for this incredible situation. I've always wanted to understand this. Who's on first? Are the police acting independently? Is it a police state? I know that the government treasures the Temple Mount. So what is this all about? Officially, it's under Israeli sovereignty. This is all very, very important, by the way. What we're discussing now is the Torah. And it's also the prerequisite for the rebuilding of the temple. So that's what I'm doing here. This is the Torah, the living Torah. The Supreme Court, tens of times, has made it clear that not all people have the right to pray on the Temple Mount. No question about that. Consistently, without exception, upheld that. But something is being concealed here, very much like the story of Purim. There's some true position that seems to be confused, ambivalent. The police are behaving in a manner which at best appears to be complicit. No, at best appears to be, let's say, negligent, and at worst complicit. On the one hand, like I say, Israel is enamored of the Temple Mount and would never part, they say, from the fact that in 1967 we reunified, we liberated the city, and that is our eternal capital, and the connection of Israel to Jerusalem is forever and has absolutely eternal significance for the rest of time. But on the other hand, there's something very strange in Israel's relationship with Jordan, because the 1994 peace accord states that Israel is going to recognize Jordan's historic and decisive role in Jerusalem's holy sites. And actually, there is no historic role. And speaking of that peace accord, it actually calls for total freedom of worship on all sides, but yet that's denied to the Jewish people. And again, on the one hand, Israel is the only country in the Middle East where Christians have civil rights, where the full civil and religious rights of all its citizens are protected and guaranteed. And there's no law that states that non-Muslims cannot pray on the Temple Mount. In fact, there is a law that everyone has to be able to, but yet the police prevent anyone that's not a Muslim from praying at the site and from displaying any religious sign or even concealing one on their person or even acting in a way that could be interpreted as prayer. And by the way, the police also prevent the display of the flag of Israel on the Temple Mount on the grounds that it might be incitements. But while it is illegal to fly anywhere in the State of Israel, the flag of a combatant entity with the State of Israel, on the Temple Mount freely, the flags of Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, Syria, ISIS are flown routinely with impunity. So the point is, there's some sort of tremendous internal struggle going on over our connection with this place. And it's like a struggle for our very soul. And like I say, it's even become an election issue. And a couple of weeks ago, the police commissioner, whose job ostensibly is to be responsible for the security of every citizen, he was speaking at some kind of university conference, and he made a statement that was absolutely outrageous. He said, and I quote, "Those Jews who ascend the Temple Mount and seek to change the status quo by praying there, especially members of Knesset who do so, represent as great an existential threat to the State of Israel as the Iranian nuclear threat." And as the police commissioner is saying, very, very bad people, Jews who go to the Temple Mount, are endangering the survival of the state no less than Iran. He's saying that the Jews who want to pray on the Temple Mount are basically, with their actions, they could lead to Israel's destruction, no less than the Iranian nuclear weapons could lead to Israel's destruction. And then he added, and anyway, what do they want to go there for? So obviously, in other words, in my opinion, this man has no understanding of the connection between the Jewish people and this place. And ironically, his job is to protect all the law-abiding citizens and not to enter into a political fray. But his job should be, well, if the law is that you're supposed to, then you have to find a way to be able to enable that. So the first thing that we have to do, since it was the great Rabbi Winston Churchill who said, a lie can get halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put on its pants. So the first thing that we do is we examine what is the status quo that we hear talked about so much. What does the word status quo mean? Status quo means literally to preserve the present situation. So there's a status quo regarding Jews, Christians, and Muslims on the Temple Mount. But actually, what it means is that the only people that are allowed to pray, it's something unwritten that's been in effect for many, many decades. The only people allowed to pray are the Muslims. And as I always tell you when we come up together, we are treated at best as unwelcome guests. And this is all, the whole concept of Muslim temple denial is a very, very recent phenomena because, I won't bore you with things that we've discussed in the past, but you know how much I like this official publication of the Muslim Supreme Council, the WAC from 1924, before the establishment of the State of Israel. In this brief guide to the Temple Mount states that the site is one of the oldest in the world. Its sanctity dates from the earliest times. Its identity with the site of Solomon's temple is beyond dispute. Even though now, of course, the official position that there never was any temple. So this is a fairly new phenomena, the temple denial. syndrome. But the idea is this status quo is like some sort of golden calf that is touted and treated like some sort of holy achievement. But it's illegal, and it contradicts Israel's basic laws, and it doesn't really make any sense that the Jews who seek to pray peacefully at the site, as guaranteed by law, are constantly described as either raising tensions or inciting or trying to change the status quo. So we need to understand what this status quo is all about. And again, after the incident in November with the attempted assassination, Israel moved to close the mount. Didn't last very long. Within 24 hours, it was reopened to Muslims only. And in the meantime, in the few hours before that happened, before Israel caved in, and of course, as in every instance of Muslim incitement, the Jews are punished, the victim is punished, the Jews are removed from the mountain. But in a short period of hours before Israel reopened it, Secretary of State John Kerry, this is what he said. He said, "I am extremely concerned by escalating tensions across Jerusalem and particularly surrounding the Haram Al-Sharif Temple Mount. It is absolutely critical that all sides exercise restraint." If you're shot, I don't know exactly how you're supposed to exercise more restraint than that. But all sides should exercise restraint, refrain from provocative actions and rhetoric, and preserve. Now, I want you to count how many times in the next sentence the word status quo is used. And preserve the historic status quo on the Haram al-Sharif in word and practice. The continued commitment by Israel, Palestinians, and Jordanians to preserve this historic status quo at the holy site is critical. Semicolon. Any decisions or actions to change it would be both provocative and dangerous. The Haram al-Sharif Temple Mount must be reopened to Muslim worshippers. This is what the Secretary of State said. And I support the long-standing practices regarding non-Muslim visitors to the site, right? In other words, I support the fact that Jews and Christians are not allowed to pray there, consistent with respect for the status quo arrangement governing religious observance there. I'm in close touch with senior Israeli, Palestinian, and Jordanian leaders to try and de-escalate the situation. I urge the leaders of all three parties to exercise decisive leadership and work cooperatingly together to lower tensions and discourage violence, alleviate restrictions on Muslim worshippers, and reinvigorate. Listen to this sentence, because I really appreciate words, but an official school diplomat really is a wordsmith. I like to use words also, but listen to this sentence. It's just the structure of the sentence is so remarkable. And reinvigorate long-standing coordination mechanisms and relationships that have served over the decades to preserve the historic status quo as it pertains to religious observance and access to the site. In other words, the Jewish people have no rights whatsoever to pray there, and it's all their fault, and their aspirations should be put down. And not only do these statements make no mention of the rights of everyone else to pray there, but they also ignore completely almost daily riots that go on there, incitement to violence. And ironically, at this very time, there was a wave of Arab terror that was going on, especially in Jerusalem, was what we called vehicular terror. For example, when an Arab terrorist with his vehicle killed a 3-year-old baby and a 22-year-old woman, no mention of this whatsoever. And one of the most difficult things that we have to understand in this whole configuration that is, again, it's really important in the world that we live in to stand up for God and to stand up for the preservation of human civilization as it was intended to be, if I may say, and to point out things that are truth and things that are lies. So, first of all, honestly, there is no Muslim connection to the Temple Mount whatsoever. Was that so hard to say? Apparently, yeah, it is. And I'm not a scholar of Islam, don't pretend to be, but I know enough, and I've spoken to scholars of Islam, and I can tell you that from a historical, theological doctrinal point of view, there's no other example in Islam of holding on to something because it used to be the direction of prayer. And the whole idea about the third holiest spot, it really doesn't exist in Islamic literature whatsoever. However, Islam is, as opposed to, for example, Torah, imperialistic and necessitates subjugation of all infidels, which probably, I hope, includes all of you. And you can be tolerated and not executed if you would accept upon yourselves dhimmi status. And that's the truth. And here is the problem. And I'll just give you one example of insights. Because the police that I've been giving you all these quotations for, they're really fine people. They actually are not even a function in this whole equation. Because what's really going on is this is an insight into one of the aspects of the bizarre relationship, for example, between Israel and Jordan. Jordan is a fictitious entity and would not exist were it not for the support of Israel technologically, etc., etc. And Israel feels very, very responsible for all of its citizens. And there's something growing on the other side of Israel, which is, as I've been saying, making its way to a theater near you as well. And Israel's concerned with propping up a stable Jordan so that that doesn't happen. And the king of Jordan is interested in demonstrating to the Arab world that he does have some power. So since in Islamic tradition, his family is actually the official descendant of Muhammad, and he is responsible for the administration of the holy sites, Israel has this problem because it must appear to the secular leaders to be a small price to pay to let him have the Temple Mount, as long as we know that we can count on him to be a buffer between us and the wave that's coming. But there's only one problem with this message. It's the wrong message to the whole world that we're giving, because without that place, without that spot, what is our reason for existing in the first place? What is our validation for being there, if not for the promise of God, the vision of the prophets that the temple will be rebuilt? And that's the job of Israel, which we need to speak more about what exactly is that job, to bring and reveal that light into the world. So it's unfortunately not really working, because the message that we're giving by saying that we'll waive, W-A-I-V-E, our claim to this place for the sake of some nebulous greater good, well, what is that without the identity of exactly who we are? So, again, we're about to observe Purim, and everybody knows that Haman is Amalek. And Amalek is really very bad, this spirit of destruction, which is not only about destroying Israel, but actually about preventing the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. And many Jewish people don't appreciate the fact that the whole story of Purim, the whole story of the Scroll of Esther, is actually, from start to finish, a story about the Holy Temple. You know this, we've been talking about it for a long time, when the story opens up in Esther of this pagan banquet that everybody was invited to, that was actually a celebration in honor of the non-building of the Holy Temple, that Achashverosh succeeded in reversing the ambivalent initiative of his predecessor Cyrus. And the impression that he had was that it wasn't going to be rebuilt. And he was so happy about that, because he knew that the world wasn't big enough for both him and God, that he threw this lavish party. And everybody knows that he wore the garments of the high priest in total mockery and served all his dishes from the vessels of the Holy Temple. And it was a terrible example of absolute scoffery and mockery and insult to the God of Israel and to the people of Israel. But he took pains to see to it that the banquet was strictly kosher, because all the Jews were invited to sit at that party. And in this teaching that is just so remarkably painful, with the pathos, the power of what the sages are trying to show us when they teach us this tradition, that The only person who didn't go to this banquet was the righteous / rebel Mordechai, the same one who didn't bow down to Haman. But all the other Jews, they went and they knew what was going on there. They knew that they were being insulted, that the God of Israel was being degraded, that the memory of the temple was being mocked, but they were so happy to be invited to the party that the only thing that would have been worse than being invited would have been not being invited, you know? It's like they were so excited to be invited, like, we made it. We're part of we're part of Persian society. We get to come to the party. And even though it was pretty clear at this party what the stand of the party is regarding Israel, the Jewish people had a very hard time leaving the party. Does that remind you of another party that the Jewish people have a hard time leaving? Anyway, the idea is that the sages continue with this teaching, which is so powerful, and they say that when they saw at the party that the temple vessels were being degraded, they all cried, but they stayed with the party. And so what happened was, when Achashverosh saw how unhappy they were, I'll stop now, Sam. He came up with a very good plan. He gave them a separate dining room so they could stay and eat their kosher meal and not really see what was going on. But the point is that the story of Purim, actually from beginning to end, if we want to summarize it, it's the story of how the Jewish people were disconnected from the temple and insensitive to its plights, and thus this decree was made. And then their reaction and the ultimate reversal of the decree and the turnabout is the story of how they actually realized their disconnect and their teshuvah, their return to the desire for the rebuilding of the Holy Temple and dedicating themselves to that. So, if Haman is Amalek, and Amalek is also, we need to understand the spirit of that force is about everything seeming to be happenstance, random. Like the folks that were shot in Delhi, it was just random. Everything is random. Nothing is really meaning anything. It's a refusal of calling things as it is, for whatever the reason is. But again, if we want to be honest and stand up for the God of Israel against the smooth-talking, globalization, whitewashing, why are we doing this? Because there is a terrible force at work in the world. And I want to try and answer the question that Esther Wachsman asked in 1994 regarding this, is it the same God or not? Because there can't be a parallel universe. There can't be a parallel God of goodness. And God makes his plan very clear as to what Israel is supposed to be doing in the world. And so therefore, if a force comes and challenges it and basically offers a type of replacement theology, if you'll pardon me, there's something very wrong here, because Israel was called to be a priest to the world, and that never changed. And this is why it's so important for everyone to understand the concept of this spiritual struggle that Israel is going through. I'm giving all these examples of this ambivalence and this misunderstanding, this disconnect, this confusion that we have about our own holy place, but it is happily and thankfully working itself out in a way that's unprecedented, where people are beginning to realize, no, there's something wrong here. This is where we belong. And nobody needs to do Israel any favors. God didn't change his mind regarding this segula. He says, you're going to be a precious thing for me from all the nations, to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. If you will hearken well to me and observe my covenant, you shall be to me the most beloved treasure of all peoples, for mine is the entire world. You shall be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Everybody likes it better when the Jews are put down. You know, it might be even offensive for a Jew to stand up and say these things, that we're supposed to be a kingdom of priests. Well, you know, we were traveling through the airport and there was a CNN report on. And I'm just apologizing that I was listening to it because it was just that I was stuck by the gate. And they make you listen to it. And so they were interviewing the former chief rabbi of Denmark about what happened. And the CNN reporter was so sympathetic. It was unbelievable. He was talking about how his prayers were with the family and everything like that. You know why? Because the best thing of all is dead Jews. That is something that is better than 500 desecrated gravestones. When there's dead Jews, people feel really, that's something that they can identify with. But the problem is that we're alive, and the priesthood of Israel, according to the Torah, again, I only know what I read, is basically destined to bring the light of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, into the world. And that's what God insists on. So what is the program exactly, according to the prophets of Israel? This is really interesting. According to the prophets, there's one program. The program is this. Israel perfects an example, a template of living for God. I didn't say that we're doing it just yet, but we're working on that. And then when Israel's life in the land is so connected to God, there's like a lighthouse effect. And this lighthouse that Israel becomes shines, illuminates the entire world, and the nations are all going to be drawn to Israel. And these priests, Israel, are going to reveal to them whose God is, which is, of course, a manifestation of the divine promise, whether we like it or not, that was made to Abraham and Jacob, and through you shall be blessed all the families of the earth. Now here's something really interesting, because Islam and some Christians also claim that it's really about them. And there's a tremendous secret that I need to share with you about where this all comes from. Because it didn't start in the year 648, it didn't start with the building of the dome by the Caliph over the spot of the foundation stone. It can be traced here in the Bible, which is really amazing because God gives us a hint here as to where all of this is coming from. It's so powerful, it's almost unspeakable, this secret. And it goes back to Genesis chapter 21. It goes back to this, chapter 21:9. Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian whom she had born to Abraham, mocking. So she said to Abraham, drive out the slave woman with her son, for the son of that slave woman shall not inherit with my son, with Isaac. The matter greatly distressed Abraham regarding his son. So God said to Abraham, be not distressed over the youth of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah tells you, heed her voice. This is referring to the level of prophecy of Sarah. Since B'yitzchak yikarei lecha zara, for Isaac will your seed be called. Through Isaac shall your seed be called. But the son of the slave woman as well will I make into a nation, for he is also your offspring. But in Hebrew, you know that it says, Vatera Sarah et ben Hagar ha-Mitzrit. Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptian, Asher yalda la-Avraham, who she gave birth to Avraham, mitzachek, which here in the art scroll is translated as mocking or joking. But what is the root of that word? You hear already. Mitzachek is like Yitzchak, right? Isaac. So what the verse is actually saying is so simple. He's saying, the Torah is saying that Sarah saw this boy Yitzchaking, Mitzachek, acting like Isaac, trying to be Isaac, trying to replace Isaac. This is exactly where it's coming from. This is why she was so upset. This is why she said, I don't want him to inherit. Because she saw right then what he was trying to do. He was trying to supplant Yitzchak. And that's exactly what the verse is telling us. So, in the meantime, all of the promises of the Torah regarding the relationship that God has with Israel as represented by the two cherubim in the Holy of Holies, the unshakable bond between Israel and God and the future, where, for example, Ezekiel 37 tells us, my dwelling place will be among them, I will be a God to them, and they will be a people to me. Then the nations will know. Then the nations will know that I am Hashem who sanctifies Israel, when my sanctuary will be among them forever, and many, many other verses. But the idea is, the fight that Israel is fighting right now is very courageous and very lonely. Do you know that if not for Israel fighting this fight against the terror that we face every day, there would be nothing standing between your way of life and total destruction? That there isn't even a word for it. What should we call it? Cannibalism? What should we call it? It's absolute burning alive is what it is. And Israel is standing like it's got its finger in the dike. Is it a baby's finger? I don't know whose finger it is exactly, but the nation of Israel has its finger in a dike that is holding back this tremendous flood of this force in the world, which for some reason is actually basically being welcomed. Grievances have to be addressed, and it's all about jobs. If people had enough jobs, then you could maybe put them all in climate change laboratories or something. Something very, very serious is happening here, and we've been talking about it for so long, and everybody knows it, but it's actually almost in a way too late. I don't think that it is, but the point is, this huge spiritual upheaval that we feel on the Temple Mount, it's just a barometer of what's really going on in the world. It's this force of revising history, of changing history, of replacing, and of this new world order is upon us, and it's a question of whether or not we, as the family of men, stand up for what God is telling us. It's a very, very unpopular subject, and it isn't easy for me for many, many reasons. But the interesting thing here is the story that we began with. That is the story of Rabbi Akiva's laughter. And many times I've been on the temple with many of the dear friends, loved ones here in this room, and been confronted with the tremendous animosity and incitement on the Temple Mount. And I've mentioned this to many of you there, that this reminds me of Rabbi Akiva and how he laughed. And I actually began to understand more recently the power of the Torah, of course, the power of our sages, the tremendous, eternal, absolute, endless vision and revelation. And I realized that Hashem is telling me that what Rabbi Akiva is really talking about, and this is why the story was preserved for so many years, because there's nothing that's random. He's talking about today. The foxes that he saw were exactly what's going on today. He wasn't even talking about that. He's talking about now. And that's why he's laughing. And I always mention when we are there and we're up against these tremendous forces of evil that are trying to intimidate us, that this is the death rattle of the other side. That senses, I just feel like looking at these black-clad Valkyries, and I just feel like saying, honey, I'm home, because the master of the house is returning. And this is exactly what they sense, that their time is up. But what will it take exactly for this to happen in a way that facilitates everything that our prophets tell us, not in a way of violence, not in a way of upheaval, but in a way of beauty, in a way of something very precious, of the knowledge of God covering the earth like the water of the sea. It's about a little thing, one step at a time, of first standing up and having the courage and the conviction to call it what it is, and not everything else in the world, and not to compare it to 1,000 years ago or anything else, because the situation today is an effort, basically exactly what Amalek did, was try to cover up the presence of God in the world and prevent the presence of God from coming back into the world. That's exactly what this is really all about today. But this battle that Israel is going through now, that the little girl Adele Bitton died for, if I may say, that every Jew that's killed in a terrorist incident in Israel, which is unfortunately so commonplace that you don't even know the names of the people that perish, it's all basically for you. Understand? It's not like one Jew once died for the whole world. This is what we do professionally, because we are held responsible, because we are to bring the light of Hashem into the world. And the fact is, it's a difficult walk, but that's why it's important for you to understand this new spirit that's going on within the body of Israel now, and how it's so different than it ever was before, and it's so real, and it's so much a part of the everyday discussion, anticipation, and agenda of every day is, how is this going to resolve itself? And with more and more determination and courage, the Jewish people are ready to take this on. And I think that what we're going to be seeing as we continue, hopefully God willing, with all of us together and with your encouragement and with our fearlessness, the whole beauty of building the Holy Temple, this Parshat Truma, this Shabbat, this is also not a coincidence in why we're here. The statement of Israel building the temple is a very, very bold statement. It means that God is allowing us to change the world. It means that God is allowing us to make for Him a place in the world. It means that God trusts us and loves us enough to say, I would also like to be here. And the whole issue of the temple from the beginning of time has always been, do we want God to be in the world or not? Obviously, it's a metaphor. Obviously, God is in the world. But the point is, will we bother to give of ourselves and to make room? Because there's a goal for humanity to be united, to be together, to stand up for the preciousness, the value of life. Because what's going on now is exactly the opposite. And if we don't have the courage and the wherewithal to admit that, then humanity is basically doomed. So, how do I end this exactly? It's a bit heavy. Well, anyway, folks, we'll be here for a few more days. We had a lot of wonderful things to talk about. Very upbeat, very happy. And I'm also very happy it's Adar. And the halacha is that when Adar enters, then we increase in joy, not mirth or frivolity, but joy. And the only joy is the true realization that even though things look to be covered over, murky, obscure, really Hashem is running everything in such an exquisite manner. And we mentioned the other night, there's everything in Hebrew has a completely different dimension. There's a word, mikre, mem kuf resh he, which means random, happenstance, coincidence. And there are forces at work even today that say that things are random. And the benefit of that, I'll tell you why people do that, because when you say that something is random, it means that you have no responsibility whatsoever, and there isn't any plan, and there isn't any responsibility. So to say that something is random is basically a facilitation of the basest nature of human beings to be able to be basically the will to receive for itself. So the tapestry, rikma, is the same letters exactly as the word mikre. What does that mean? If you have a large wall hanging and you go up to it very, very close, you can't see very much because you're blinded by this detail. But if you step further back, then all of a sudden you see the whole picture. So the Torah is teaching us, by utilizing the same letters, that what appears to be happenstance and random and coincidence is really part of a very, very big picture. And I believe that all of us are in this tapestry right now, and it's a pretty difficult picture that we're in right now. And I think that it will take a tremendous amount of dedication, bravery, courage, and most of all, dignity and belief in the righteousness of our cause and conviction to stand up for Hashem, to turn this tide. But that is the secret of Adar, and that is the secret of Purim, that can be done when we rededicate ourselves to that goal. And so really, it is a very, very upbeat very, very upbeat message. I cannot recall in history a period of time in which the concept of the Holy Temple was more relevant or on the lips of the people of Israel or being prepared for or taking over daily events than it is now. And commensurate to that great spiritual revolution is a tremendous force of darkness, opposition, evil, and mass destruction. Because those are the only two forces in the world. The force of what God wants in the world and our willingness to do it, or the force that doesn't want that. And the choice is essentially ours, and yet may be determined here in Lubbock. And if you believe that, then you're correct, because it's up to every individual to decide exactly what we're going to do for Hashem's honor and for the sake of the world, really coming to its fruition of understanding that the most precious and beautiful and holy thing in the world is to know that there's a God in the world who is not only our Creator, but our Father, who loves us, who unites us, who created us in order just to be able to know Him and to be able to go through our simple, humble lives saying that we really know that He's here, that He loves us, and that there is a future for humanity which is bright. So Chodesh Tov. Happy month of Adar.